Spectre Vision Radio.
I was always a liberal parent, mostly by design. After all, it wasn't the way I'd been raised, and I'd vowed not to repeat the damaging cycle of the expectations I'd been forced to adhere to. So I kept myself in check, took a step back whenever I was feeling a conservative or authoritarian impulse, and made sure I quashed it before it had a chance to materialize. But when my daughter, Gloria, introduced me to her new boyfriend, Eric, I sent myself into a bit of a tailspin. I instantly disliked the guy. He was polite enough and shook my hand as we exchanged the typical pleasantries, but there was something slimy about him that I didn't trust. It was like I could see, despite the fact that he was only 19 years old, that he already had the qualities to grow into a snake oil salesman, some kind of huckster. If you'd asked me to put my finger on it, I'd have said he had a sharkiness, a predacious glint in his eyes, and angular sharpness to his grin that I found unsettling. My wife Astrid scolded me for being the cliché I'd always insisted I'd never turn into when I aired my concerns, insisting Eric was a perfectly nice guy and that I should be happy Gloria was dating someone like him. Just think what her first real boyfriend could have been like, she said. I told her she was right, and did my best to convince myself she was, too. But my doubts resurfaced when we all went out for dinner together. After a nice enough meal, I went to use the restroom and asked for the check on my way back to the table. But the server informed me it had already been taken care of. By who? I asked, and the server pointed across the room to Eric. I felt deeply offended. I did my usual routine of trying to call out my emotions, but this was more than some kind of traditionalist pride being wounded. Eric had hit me where it hurt. Money was tight, real tight, tighter than even my wife was aware of. This dinner being a good example of it, spending money I shouldn't have been. All I was really doing was digging the family deeper and deeper into a pit that it would take some kind of miracle to climb out of. But Eric couldn't have known that, I told myself. His gesture wasn't intended to cause me the distress it was. Even if I chose to take it the wrong way, at most it was him brandishing his feathers like a peacock, strutting his stuff, asserting himself. Arrogant? Maybe. Naive? Possibly. But that was it. I went back over to the table and waited for Gloria and Astrid to get caught up in conversation before I leaned over and quietly thanked Eric. You didn't have to do that, I said. Oh, but I did, he replied. He flashed me what I thought was a mischievous grin, and Gloria interrupted us just when I was about to grill him, ask him what he meant by that. But the opportunity had passed, and the little that was left of the evening played out without incident. It didn't disappear from my mind, but it conveniently made its way to the back of it. Until the next time we all went to dinner, that is. This time, I made sure to pay for the meal while we were all still eating, and said a silent thank you to the God I wasn't sure I believed in when the card payment went through. Our bellies were full, and I'd been the one to provide it. Not even the ridiculous fact that I couldn't afford it could stop me from feeling a little smug. We made our way out of the restaurant and over to the dark lot where I'd parked as a way of avoiding having to spend even more money on a valet. As I grabbed my keys from my pocket, a man emerged from the shadows, brandishing a gun. He waved it around, saying he wanted the money from all our wallets and purses, plus the car keys. I froze, and the assailant did not like that. He stepped forward and pointed the gun at my head, mere inches away from my skin, barking out his demands once more. But Eric lunged at him, so fast he completely blindsided the guy. He dropped the gun and it went skidding off under another vehicle before scrambling to his feet and running as fast as he could, and then disappearing into the night, with nothing to show for his reckless, failed plan. Eric helped Astrid and Gloria into the car, who were both visibly shaken. He then turned to face me, and when he did, I saw pity in his eyes. "Don't worry, Mr. Burton," he said, looking down at my pants. "We'll get you home." I looked down and saw it too. I hadn't realized it, but my jeans were soaked with piss. My relationship with Eric changed somewhat after that. Despite his heroics, I still wasn't sure about him. But now I mainly felt embarrassed. Though I knew better, I felt emasculated by his show of strength in the face of danger. Suddenly, I felt all the notions about being a real man that I knew to be toxic flooding back in, despite the fact that I'd renounced them so long ago. It bothered me, there's no doubt. But I had more important things to think about, bigger things occupying my headspace. The hole I was digging for myself and my family was still getting deeper. I'd convinced my old friend Mark to lend me the money for Gloria's next tuition payment, even though I knew he was already frustrated that I hadn't paid back what I'd already borrowed from him. But when I tried to make the transaction, I was told by the college accounts team that it had already been paid. They wouldn't tell me by who, but I knew. Eric, once again doing his best to usurp me, to render me useless. When I saw Eric's car pull up a few days later, I went out to intercept him before he could approach the house. He clocked my intentions as soon as he saw me. "It's time we had a talk, right?" he asked. I nodded, but I was a little thrown by his ability to read me so clearly. "Why don't you like me?" he said. Again, I hadn't expected such an upfront, direct question. I fumbled my way through the thoughts I'd organized, the things I'd prepared that I wanted to say, but it was like the stack of papers in my mind had been knocked to the ground and mixed up. So instead, I found myself asking him something. "The tuition payment. You're 19 years old, Eric. How is it you can afford that?" He smirked. "I'm no drug dealer, if that's what you're getting at," he replied. "Besides, I could ask you the same question." I stared at him, but I was nowhere near as good at reading him as he was me. "Your daughter knows more about your money troubles than you think," he said. "You should be thanking me for picking up the check from time to time." It was an absolute gut punch, one that stunned me to silence. But instead of going in for the kill, Eric's demeanor shifted to one of sympathy. He put a hand on my shoulder and gave it a gentle squeeze. "I'm unsure whether to say this, or if it'll make things worse," he added. "But you can ask me if you need to borrow money, Mr. Burton." A few weeks later, I came home to see my wife Astrid sitting at the kitchen table, eyes bloodshot from crying, and a typed, official-looking letter in front of her. Why she'd chosen that day to be the first in all the years we'd been together to open a piece of mail addressed to me, I didn't know. But it only meant one thing. I was forced to tell her the truth. I'd been laid off well over a year ago, but had been too embarrassed, too wounded to tell her. So, instead, I'd get up every morning, pretend I was going to work, and head over to a coffee shop where I'd wait out the days by sending out resumes and ordering the cheapest thing on the menu as a justification for being there. Astrid didn't look angry. She just looked numb. She slumped back in her chair, like someone had pulled her batteries out. "How bad is it?" she asked. "As bad as it gets," I replied. I told her about the time-sensitive investment opportunities I'd been lured into, promised a quick payday that had resulted in disaster. They'd been no better than gambles, rolls of the dice, but in my desperation I'd convinced myself they were surefire bets. "What do we do?" Astrid said. "I don't know," I replied. That evening, Eric came to pick up Gloria in a new car. I was seething. I waited for him to drop her back home later that night, having decided to follow him. Let's see what Mr. Perfect really gets up to, I thought. Let's see just how great he is when everyone knows he's peddling drugs, or pimping, or whatever the fuck else. Let's show them that I might be at the bottom of the barrel, but at least I'm honest. At least I am who I say I am. I followed until Eric pulled into a dirt parking lot littered with other cars, directly in front of a building that looked derelict, the windows all boarded up. But I watched as he made his way around it and disappeared, and I figured there must be an entrance round back. So I parked and took the same route. The building had probably once been some kind of warehouse, but when I stepped inside, I was greeted by a very strange spectacle. The space had been fashioned into some kind of makeshift arena. There were temporary bleachers set up on either side of a sand pit, with dozens of people taking their seats and seemingly awaiting some kind of event. I decided the best thing to do was pull my baseball cap low over my face and take a seat, blend in. As I did, the guy next to me gave me a silent nod as I sat down beside him, and I returned the gesture. But I didn't have to sit there long before the overhead lights went out. The crowd waited in silence until a man was ushered into the pit by two others. They removed all his clothes, leaving him totally naked, and then hurried away. Then, Eric stepped into the pit, lifted a megaphone to his mouth, and addressed the crowd. "If he wins, he takes home the prize money," he said, pointing at the naked man. "And tonight, there's $1 million up for grabs." Some kind of barbaric, amateur fight club, I thought. This is how Eric was making his money, running illegal bets on men beating the shit out of each other. It was far stranger than anything I'd imagined. Far worse than anything I'd hoped for in my insatiable need to discredit the lofty reputation he'd built amongst my family. Eric then left the pit, and the naked man stood alone for half a minute or so, until a group of men approached on the opposite side. They were wheeling something over. It was some kind of oblong iron box, but it had a door on the front of it, one that was locked tight with a heavy padlock. As they set it down, you could hear the thudding coming from inside it. There was clearly something within that desperately wanted to get out. All but one of the men who'd been carrying it stepped back. He was the one tasked with unlocking it. The second he turned the key and pulled the padlock away from the door, he rushed back and out of the pit. The door to the iron box opened, and a man stumbled out. At least, that's what I first thought he was. It was more that he must once have been a man. What he was now, I wasn't sure. Back hunched, arms dangling, barely any humanity left behind his eyes. A lumbering, distorted monster. This thing, whatever he was, spotted the naked man at the other end of the pit and immediately lurched into an uneven run. It was as if he had some kind of rabies, governed only by an aggressive impulse, and need to get at what was in front of him and destroy it. The naked man met him head on and they grappled in a horrible, brutal mess of limbs. It was awful to watch, but the crowd were transfixed by every sickening blow, every unnerving crack, rip, and tear of the flesh or bone. The thing finally managed to pin the naked man to the ground, and when he did, he sank his teeth into the skin over his combatant's ribcage. The naked man screamed as the thing audibly chewed through gristle. I instinctively jolted to my feet, but the guy next to me grabbed my jacket and tugged me back down into my seat. "We have to do something," I hissed. The guy looked at me like I was nuts. "Didn't they tell you what happens if they lose?" he asked. I watched as the men who'd wheeled the iron box into the pit ran on and used a taser to subdue the thing, to subdue the monster. It slid off the naked man, mouth rimmed with blood and organic tissue. They quickly grabbed its limp body and carted it back into the box, locking it tight. But no one came to the aid of the naked man, who was bleeding profusely. I could just about make out that his chest was still rising and falling, with quick, struggling breaths. Then he began to convulse, writhing around uncontrollably, screaming in agony. I watched as his body morphed, became the same as the thing he'd been fighting. When the sickening transformation was complete, the same group of men ran back into the pit and corralled him into another box, into captivity. I waited in the dusty parking lot. It wasn't until I was alone, until all the other cars had driven away, that Eric left the warehouse. When our eyes met, I could tell he wasn't the least bit surprised I was there. "I knew you were following me," he said, strolling over. "I wanted you to see this." I stayed quiet. I wasn't sure what the hell to say to that. "So, what do you think?" he asked. It took a second to sink in. I was taken aback by the idea. "I don't want in on this," I said. He stared at me like he was checking I was serious, before a hearty laugh escaped his throat. He doubled over, finding something utterly hilarious. "In on it?" he asked, incredulous. "You must be kidding." I stared back at him, unsure of what he was getting at. "I'm not asking you to get in on it," he said. "I'm asking if you want to fight." My knees went weak. How had my life led me here? To this conversation? To this nightmarish offer? I wanted to tell him to go fuck himself. But instead, I found myself asking a question. "What's the prize money?" He smiled. "Enough to make all your problems go away," he replied. My head became a churning soup of everything that had happened since I'd been laid off. I found myself stupefied by the situation, by the fact I was having an exchange so bizarre. "How about I let you take a look at them before you decide?" Eric added. Eric led me around the side of the warehouse and into a smaller building just beside it. It was laid out like a stable, only the walls on either side were lined with cages. Within each of them was a creature just like the one I'd seen bite chunks out of the naked man in the pit. As soon as we got near, they all descended into uncontrollable fits of rage, throwing their bodies against the bars, screaming and clamoring to get at us, clearly wanting to tear us apart. They seemed to have no other impulse than destroy. It was like peeking behind the curtain at a demented circus in the depths of hell. Eric took me back outside, and I walked in a stupor back towards our cars. He told me to give it some thought before hopping into his vehicle and disappearing into the night. I was in no fit state to drive, so I just abandoned my car and started walking. My head swam as I went over and over the same train of thought. But what I was really doing was trying to make myself see sense, because I knew that I was going to take Eric up on his offer. The way I saw it, there were only two outcomes. Either I won and all my problems would vanish, or I lost, and in that case, my problems would all vanish for a different reason, because I simply wouldn't be aware of them anymore. My feet were aching and blistered by the time I made it home, and I hadn't been able to change my mind. That first year after I'd ventured into the pit was a blur. The prize money was enough to pull my family out of the hole I'd been digging and let us start again, this time more modestly. Eric broke it off with Gloria, and I wondered if he'd just been an opportunist who'd realized his girlfriend's father might be a good pawn in his sick, lucrative games, or if their entire relationship had just been a way to get close to me, a mark he'd already identified. We coasted on in our course-corrected existence. Gloria got over the pain of being jilted. Astrid and I tried to rebuild our relationship. I wish that was how it all ended, but I'd be lying if I said that was the case. I was tormented by the things I'd seen, by the things I'd done, and my improved financial situation couldn't move me past that. Past the dreams, the night terrors, the waking moments of utter trauma. So I went back to that warehouse, to that strange slice of hell where it had all transpired. I scoped it out and waited for the right moment. And let's just say Eric is no longer with us. Once I'd taken care of him, I ventured out into the building where those pitiful things were caged. Those pitiful things I'd almost become one of. Then I put them out of their misery as quickly as I could. Once the deed was done, I considered doing myself the same favor. But I knew it wasn't the right time. Not yet. Because I'm sure there are other places like this one. Other hellish playgrounds where perverted puppet masters cackle with glee as they force their brutalized, enslaved marionettes to dance. And now, I'm on a mission to find them.